Going into Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the question was never how big a hit the final ever DCEU movie was going to be, but if it was going to end up faring even worse than the Marvels or merely almost as bad. We now have our answer, but it's not going to help either James Gunn or audiences going forward. On December 31st of 2023, Cosmic Book News wrote, "Sorry MCU fanboys, the Aquaman 2 box office has now passed the Marvels by a large margin. DC's Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is now up to $258.27 million on a budget of $205 million, while the Marvels stalled out at only $205 million worldwide on a budget of $275 million. Here I'd like to add in that the budget is what you plan on spending up front, which is typically less than what you end up having spent after massive and multiple rounds of reshoots. Something both of these movies were subject to, so they both cost a lot more than the budgets would have you believe. Moving on with the article though, both flicks actually have the same domestic box office, around 84 million, but it's the international audience that makes up the big difference. Aquaman 2 has a foreign box office of 173.6 million, while the Marvels bombed with 121 million. So, it's the international audience that makes up the difference. Now, to be fair, we don't have an exact breakdown of the genders of the international audience, but we do know that domestically, it was the ladies that stayed away from the Marvels in droves. Well, granted, everyone stayed away in droves, but it was even more so women, the very audience the movie was tailored towards, that abandoned it. Meanwhile, I spoke with the staff at my local cinema, which falls in under the International Markets banner, and their experience was the same. While very few went to see the Marvels, their recollection was that of those that did, the majority were guys, and most of them were middle-aged. Very few also went to see Aquaman. Case in point, here's a picture of my advanced screening, but again, of those that did go see it, most were couples or scattered groups of friends, many of which were female friends. This cinema doesn't collect formal data on the gender or age of their audience, but according to the recollection of the staff working there, meaning it's the best data I can get, more women went to see Aquaman, probably for Jason Momoa. By contrast, The Marvels, a movie made so women could see themselves on screen, floundered completely. Granted, what I was able to track here isn't much of a data point, but I'm sure that if Hollywood put their minds to it, they could find the data necessary to test the hypothesis that audiences need to see themselves on screen. And if they were to do so, then I have a hunch that the 2023 data would crush that hypothesis. Let's move on with the article. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom also got a boost from its China release with 33.7 million, while the Marvels only made half that, 15.2 million. Well, the China numbers don't really matter, because for most studios, certainly Warner, 90% of that money stays in China with the CCP. Disney does get a higher percentage, so maybe both studios got around the same amount for these China releases. But for Disney, the price to pay for that was having sold out to China in the first place, and with it, the risk that the CCP can simply confiscate both the Shanghai and Hong Kong Disney resorts at their leisure. So I'd say Warner still got the better deal in the end. Moving on with the article, Aquaman 2 also only saw a 29.6% drop from week 1 to week 2. The Marvels? It's the worst performing superhero movie of all time, dropping a massive 78.1%. Of course, for Aquaman, that is something of a Pyrrhic victory, meaning they may have beaten out the Marvels at the box office, but DC burned out in the process. Case in point, in their December 31st box office update, Variety highlighted that in the final weekend of the year, Wonka, a movie which opened earlier, had soundly defeated Aquaman 2 at the box office. Their story reads, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is quickly sinking at the box office. The comic book adventure, starring Jason Momoa as the King of Atlantis, was positioned on the calendar as the de facto blockbuster of the holiday season. But, so far, the follow-up to 2018's mega-hit Aquaman has failed to recapture the spark of the original. The $205 million budgeted tentpole caps off 2023, a terrible year for superhero movies, as the fourth consecutive flop for Warner Brothers and DC Studios following The Flash, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, and Blue Beetle. Here I'd like to chime in that their release before that, Black Adam, was also billed as a flop at the time, but that's looking pretty good right now, isn't it? Anyway, moving on. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom swam to second place in its sophomore outing, collecting a soft $19.5 million over the weekend and an estimated $26 million through New Year's Day on Monday. It has grossed $84 million domestically and $258 million globally after 2 weeks of release, on par with eventual comic book disappointments like The Flash, The Marvels, and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. By contrast, Wonka, a movie that I quite enjoyed, see my review over at Midnight's Edge Live Archives, where you'll also find clips from live streams, cost less than half of any of this year's comic book movies to make, and so far has grossed $400 million worldwide. Meaning, Warner can take solace in the fact that while Aquaman may have failed, they still won Christmas with Wonka, and that they would release it and Aquaman so close to each other in the first place only goes to show that they had written Aquaman off completely at that point. Still, that Aquaman is doing, if not well, then at least better than the Marvels, and certainly better than many might have hoped that it was going to, only goes to show that Jason Momoa is still something of a selling point, so James Gunn having him return as Lobo might not be too bad an idea. Let's just see if audiences are ready to give DC another chance by the time James Gunn's Superman reboot is due to be released in the summer of next year. I mean, the DCEU didn't exactly end on a high note, what with all the international organizations coming together to fight global warming at the expense of national governments, while Patrick Wilson had the side of bug to his burger. We'll see if the foul aftertaste will have left audiences' mouths in time for James Gunn's reboot come 2025. Right now, though, I'm more concerned with comic book and similar genre properties in the present and near future. I mean, not that anyone knew or cared, but Season 2 of Marvel's animated What If is out right now, Echo will be coming out on Disney Plus in a couple of weeks, and so will Sony and Marvel's Madam Web on the big screen, before Netflix will round out January with Kevin Smith's Masters of the Universe Revolution. It's only January, and I'm already dreading what is to come. The industry is pinning all its hopes on Deadpool 3 at this point. The challenge for that movie is that it's going to have a lot of bad comic book movie and other genre property fatigue to contend with by the time it comes out. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.